Alrighty, so today we're going to branch off from where we left off last time with respect to Mesopotamia and the imperial aspects of that region. We're going to be looking at um, basically what happens in this region over time. And there's two big empires and then a couple other ones that we're going to talk about. So, first one that we're going to be looking at is the Akkadian Empire, and that is going to be under the Sargon of Akkad, or Sargon of Akkad, not the Sargon, but Sargon of Akkad. And he is going to be leader of the Akkadians, and he is going to start as a mid-level to high-level official, administrator, basically, and also a warrior with one of the Mesopotamian city-states called Kish, Kish. And he's going to eventually, over time, gain a notoriety and a following, and he's going to overthrow the king that happens to be at that city-state, and basically, anoint himself the king. Now, we're going to see the creation of empire as it relates to Sargon because we go from a kingship to an empire. Now, what does that really mean? Well, basically, what we're looking at is he is going to conquer other city-states and put them within his area of influence. And he's going to control them from his seat of leadership. So it's not that he's going to, make kings bow to him or whatnot. What he's going to do is he's going to actually fight, take over those city-states, and then he's going to place individuals as the de facto administrator or governor of those locations to kind of manage the territory for him, and he goes from place to place. Now, Sargon's war machine was very impressive, especially for the era, but Sargon did not have the advantages that we'll see other imperial states have. Sargon moved from city-state to city-state as he conquered them, as he beat them into submission, and he didn't really understand what it meant to have, or at least didn't seem to understand what it meant to have a peaceful empire. Every single city-state that he was at, he forced into some kind of submission, which is fine in the short term, as he conquers city-state after city-state and torches the leadership body and whatnot, and then replaces it and then goes about his way. Eventually, though, when you're super brutal like that, there is a problem generally with what people are going to think of you. So Sargon is going to deal with this a little bit of a PR problem as he starts to have no one left to fight. And in order to keep people in line, he ends up having to go back to certain city-states that he had conquered previously. Now, the reason why this is a problem is you need to think of it in perspective of resources generally, right? Sargon, for much of his reign in this region, is going to be with the military forces. He's going to be going from place to place, city-state to city-state, and they're going to have to provide him shelter and provide his soldiers food and to take care of whatever needs that they need to take care of, which they're not used to dealing with that kind of a stressor. Think of it this way. You have a small town of maybe a few hundred, maybe a couple of thousand, and then all of a sudden 5, 6, 7,000 people show up and they need immediate lodging, they need food, they need water, and you only have so many resources for the people you are actually normally taking care of day to day. It's not like you have a warehouse ready to go, like a Costco style thing that you can kind of go to and say, we're going to bring out the big guns for resources. Sargon is going to look at this as, you need to provide me these resources because I am the king, or in this case, he's going to start to build himself as an emperor, or what we would call today an emperor. So this is going to start to develop quite a bit of unrest in the regions that Sargon controls, which is then going to cause people to rebel and fight back against Sargon's army, which is then going to cause Sargon to basically negatively impact those regions and really put those rebellions down for good reason. I mean, in this particular case, Sargon has a wonderfully good reason as to why he's going to use violence as the main mechanism, but this does not make a long-term solution for empire really stick. because Sargon's having to fight constantly and he's having to put down rebellion after rebellion, he's never really given a time where he can just kind of chill out and be peaceful, because he is effectively constantly and sporadically taxing regions of the world, and they have no idea when or where it's going to happen next. And this unpredictability is going to be really what's going to set Sargon down the path for ruin. And not him specifically, but all of his descendants, because his empire is not going to last, more than a few hundred years, simply because they just aren't able to keep everyone in line. A centralized state that needs to have an army go place to place to be able to keep everyone in line is very, very difficult to manage. If the individual states are able to kind of, manage themselves, it's a much different kind of philosophy going forward. So Sargon, although he is a fantastic military commander, and although that he does have quite a bit of notoriety as a military general and as a warrior, his legacy ultimately is going to be one of lack of really foresight when it comes to trying to bring all of the aspects of what it means to be a true leader or a true emperor. So his empire is going to kind of fall to the wayside, and a new one is going to form several hundred years later, and that is the Babylonians. So Sargon is going to be in one of the city-states in Mesopotamia off the Tigris and Euphrates. Babylonia, or Babylon, as it were, is going to be basically where like modern-day Baghdad would be today in Iraq. And Hammurabi is going to be the picture-perfect example of the new style of emperor, the new style of king that fashions himself a little bit more grander than some of the emperors or some of the kings that have happened before him, similar to Sargon of Akkad. Now, it's important to note that Hammurabi looked at Sargon to a point as kind of an example of what to do in certain aspects. The administrative state and the techniques that Sargon used was very influential for Hammurabi, and he's going to take that bureaucratic system and he's going to start kind of marrying it with better useful tools that are going to be well more efficient, I guess would be the best way to say it. It's going to increase the efficiency of his empire generally. So Hammurabi is going to, instead of conquering the different city-states that are nearby, he is going to do that, but he's not going to just like leave an army there, or he's not going to just like rely on brute force. He's basically going to subdue the people there, put a military or provincial governor in place of that city-state, and then he's going to set up something that is really kind of a game changer to how this is going to be ruled. And what it is he's going to set up regular taxes. It makes sense today because we have taxes yearly, as in the United States. We also have we have sales tax that occurs, but our income tax stuff, Hammurabi is going to be kind of the first guy that really looks at that and says, we're going to have regular taxes. And the reason why this is such a difference with Sargon versus Hammurabi is you're not going to have the shock of having to pay for several thousand soldiers all of a sudden. Now they kind of know when taxes are due. So now people can kind of predict, and if they need to grow more food that year because they know they're going to have to give so much in for taxes, they know when these things are going to occur, so they can prepare for them a lot better. And that's going to really bring down the resentment for Hammurabi that existed under Sargon's leadership. Hammurabi is going to basically take that and morph it and say, okay, well, how do I make these guys like me, right? How do I make the aspects that Sargon dealt with, how do I make those not issues for me? In addition to that, Hammurabi is going to develop the first real legal system that is going to try to basically come up with laws for basically everything. There are tons and tons and tons of situational laws, but the most important generality about this is something called lex talionis. Now, lex talionis, all it really means is the law of retribution or retaliation. The law of retaliation, the law of retribution. Now, what that refers to is I'm going to say what it refers to, and then I'm going to kind of like paraphrase to a point. the offenders are going to suffer the same punishments that are in the violations. You might hear this as an eye for an eye. So if you stab somebody, you would be stabbed. If you cut someone's hand off, your hand would get cut off. And there are tons of other implications there as to what this law system is going to do. But it's going to have a very crucial system where everyone basically has the law applied to them. And this is going to be really that kind of central force where people go, okay, I have the ability to argue my case in front of the king, and there is going to actually be written down laws that Hammurabi is going to have. And we call this system Hammurabi's Code. So if you ever refer to the first codified law system, it is Hammurabi's, as we know that he wrote them down and had them transcribed. And Hammurabi is the first dude to really kind of go above and beyond and have a legal system that supposedly is going to basically apply to everybody in his empire. And he regardless of wealth, regardless of standing, regardless of who they were. Now, that is not to mean that the laws are not written in such a way that they treat people differently, because in some cases, they absolutely do treat people differently. For instance, there's different punishments for freemen versus slaves. There's different punishments for the upper elite, the aristocratic class, the politicians. There's different levels of punishment, but the crimes themselves are still going to be applied to the vast majority of people based on what's going on. All right, so we talked a little bit about Hammurabi, we talked about Sargon of Akkad, and now we're going to be looking at the next empire that really kind of comes out just around the time that iron is a big deal. And iron is really the game changer here because of what's going to happen. Okay, and we're back. Sorry, I had an issue outside that I had to pause for a minute there. All right, so the next group that we're going to see is a group that is going to basically be the heir apparent of the Babylonians, and that is the Assyrians. Now, the Assyrians are going to have a rival in the region. They're going to be several hundred years after the Babylonians, after Babylon kind of falls apart. In modern day, what would be modern day Israel, there is going to be the Israeli king Solomon, and he is going to have the kingdom of that region. And once Solomon's reign basically falls apart due to the fact that Solomon passes away, tribal tensions that were held together by King Solomon are going to cause this region to break apart. So you're going to have Judea, you're going to have Judea, which sounds a lot like the same thing. You're going to have Israel, and there's a whole bunch of other smaller communities and kingdoms that are going to be around that are not going to have the uniformity and combined force that they once did. And the Assyrians are going to take advantage of that. Now, the Assyrians, very similar to Sargon, are going to be fantastic at conquering, and they're going to be very bad at ruling. What do I mean by that? And I don't mean that Sargon specifically was super bad at this, but they're going to be the complete opposite of the Hammurabis of the world. The Assyrians were fantastic fighters. They used iron to the largest degree that we've seen in this particular area. The Assyrians are going to be amazing tacticians when it comes to battlefield progress. However, they're only really focused on winning battles. Once they don't have anyone left to fight, their management of their conquered territory isn't really all that great. And because of that, the Assyrian Empire doesn't really gain a lot of traction because they just conquer everything and there's nothing left for them to do once they've beaten everyone back. Another group that we look at with respect to empire is a group called the Phoenicians. Now, these people are really, really interesting because we look at them as a respect of empire, but they don't actually conquer anyone in the traditional sense. They're not going and fighting anybody. What the Phoenicians do is they set up the most intricate and complex trade network oversee in the Mediterranean. They're going to basically set up a network of city states all throughout the region in northern Africa, the Middle East, on the border of the Mediterranean. And they're going to have this intricate trade network that is going to bring different concepts to certain places of the world that don't normally see those concepts. And more importantly, they're going to start to bring language with them. So we're going to start to see the use of the Phoenician alphabet. If you've ever gone and opened up a dictionary or thesaurus or what have you, and you see the word spelled in English, and then right next to it is a parentheses with letters that are all kind of like jumbled and upside down with like little accents and all these little different lines and symbols. We call that spelling phonetic spelling. That's how to say the word in the language that it's spelled. And that comes from the Phoenicians. Like phonics, for instance, is something that comes from the Phoenicians. So the Phoenicians were very, very good at kind of embedding themselves into all of the different cultures that were around them. And they shared with all of the areas that they encountered. They shared language, they shared cultures, they shared beliefs, and they absorbed as well as they transmitted. So a lot of the bleed over, a lot of the similarities that start to occur within cultures happen because the Phoenicians are so connected to everybody. And because they're not fighting anybody, really, pretty much people leave them alone. They let them kind of be this trade network, and because that's all they really cared about was influencing people through language, through culture, and what have you. So the region is going to benefit quite a bit from the Phoenicians' footprint, and we're going to actually see written language as it exhibits toward different types of language. We're going to look at Semitic script, which is going to be Phoenician, Hebrew, and early Phoenician, Hebrew, and then Phoenician, and then we're going to see how that parlays into Greek writing, and then how Greek writing gets to Etruscan, and then eventually to Latin, and we're going to see our common ABCD kind of alphabet, and I'm going to show you that in the not too distant future. So the Indo-European groups, the different groups that exhibit that exist in Mesopotamia, that interface with each other, they're all going to have like common ancestry, and we're going to see common ancestry specifically when we look at some of the languages. We're going to see how all of this kind of plays together as we look forward. But I want you to think about the idea of empire, and I want to really get the point that empire does not necessarily mean that it needs to be a military endeavor, because the Phoenicians, by every stretch, as far as everything except for military prowess, they had a very, very intense effect on culture, on belief systems, on writing, on language. And that was as impactful as Sargon or Hammurabi's militaristic style of empire. So I wanted to give you a couple of different versions of it. And also the Assyrians is a picture perfect reason of of an empire that doesn't have the administrative basis that Sargon's had or that Hammurabi's had, where you have people in place that manage the city-state for you. The Assyrians just demolished everything that they saw, and they beat them through military might, which is really awesome if you're trying to just wipe people out. But if you're trying to deal with people after the fact, right? If you're trying to deal with people that have gone through these wars or these battles, eventually you have to come to grips and come to peace with them, because you now conquer them. You now have controlled them. Well, if they only know fear, they're not going to necessarily want to ever be around you. And that's just going to cause people to eventually rebel and keep pushing against your leadership, and eventually your empire is going to fall apart. So we're going to see a couple of different things that occur with respect to all of this, and we're going to be keeping on with our aspect of empire as we look at the Old Kingdom next week of Egypt, and then we look at the Middle and New Kingdoms of Egypt. That's what we're going to be focusing on next. Make sure you go back into the reading and ask any questions. I will get you back up to speed next time.